You are on tape.
Okay.
No swearing then.
Oh, man. There's
Tracy-
a no
Tracy will
swearing
cover that
rule
for
and I
us.
quit. Although I've done really well so far. I didn't even swear at Leo.
So maybe if we would just want to start by going around the room and doing introductions, just name and then what organization you're with and your role in that organization.
How do you want to start? Kelly Reese. I'm the editor of the Garden County News and Registration Alaska, and I represent Garden County.
I'm involved in the planning for cities at Platte.
I'm Pat Heath. I'm for the first director for the city game.
And I'm Dave Ostick. I'm on the board of the NRD, and I think that's the role I'm
That's the hat you're wearing.
here.
today.
I'm from Scotts Bluff.
I'm Elizabeth. This is Tracy, if you weren't at the meeting the other day. So I think we'll just start by, when you think of drought, what comes to mind? And we'll try and put down some thoughts on how we see drought, and then we'll start bringing that together with your specific roles, especially in local governance and media relations. So you can either refer to a memory of a drought experience that you went through, things that you see in the media, just in general, what is drought bring to mind?
Yes, I see it as a reduction in, of course, annual precipitation. And it could even be just seasonal precipitation. And maybe, in this area, we're affected by the snowpack mountains, so it might not be local precipitation, but it might be regional precipitation. And then also maybe a reduction in river flows.
Okay. Others?
I guess for myself, coming from a farm background, when I was 14, I started doing all the irrigating for my dad, which is about 700 acres or so, and all flood irrigated at the time, and that would have been in 2002. So through high school and college, we had some really dry years, and just trying to get the water to go across this bone dry ground and not always having all that much irrigation water. And so, kind of gives you a really strong awareness of two different things. One is the overall effect of drought and the shortage of water. And the other thing too is the awareness of how important and how vital the snowpack and the irrigation water is to our community. Because, during those dry years, you get just outside of the irrigated areas, just outside of the valley there, and you come over a hill and you've got this beautiful green agricultural area, and none of that would be there if it weren't for the snowpack.
Okay.
The first thing I think of, I guess, is the dirty 30s. And I've had parents that have went through that, and you can tell by the way they live even today what that has been and what that meant to them. I pray we never have that again, but chances are we could. I'm from the dryland farming background, so our wheat is dependent on moisture. And when we go through a drought period, the economy's down, the crops down. It's also goes over into the businesses and small rural communities that I live in and represent, and the spending, you know, every tightens a belt. It's all related to moisture. And the lakes are prime example. From the snowfall and the snowpack and plus just the drought around here. There's a building boom right now because of it's been up for recent years, so water's been up. People have more lake to enjoy instead of just the eastern end. Right, with the comments side. So, you know, it affects everyone, all walks of life.
Okay.
I think about stress on the aquifer because even in good years, we're really close to that tipping point. I remember in 2002, Randy mentioned 2002, when again, that regional outlook, that the snowpack wasn't there to help recharge our aquifer, and there were domestic wells that started going dry real quickly when everything got dry here, when there wasn't that supply of irrigation water in the canal to help recharge the aquifers. And from the management standpoint, then that increases the demand for groundwater in a lot of cases if the surface water isn't there. So that only potentially makes the problem worse. And it makes me think of all the extra, as both a homeowner and related to irrigation, all the extra steps you have to take to make sure that your lawn or your crop doesn't burn. And then wildfire. Speaking of things, just I didn't know things are that dry down there that
It's really bad, yeah. Okay.
But the Pine Ridge and the Valentine area and all of the areas that have been hit by fire in the last year. And the stress that puts on, again, communities, the volunteers who do that, landowners that affects.
I don't think I definitely agree on the, both fire and groundwater levels. And, we saw this in the drought 2002, I believe, and in 06, I believe, was a terribly dry year.
Mm-hmm.
And, I have a neighbor that was a well driller, so they were, I don't know, he had 200 or 300 people waiting to get wells drilled because the canals, the issue is the irrigation canals weren't on. So one year, I don't even think some of them turned on.
Oh, wow.
And people's wells were drying up because the canals were off. They're domestic wells, not their mainly irrigation wells. So, that has a big effect when there's a lack of water supply, and they either have reduced water supply for the canals and they're only on a couple months, or if they're just on a short time, that really affects the people that especially live out in the Grand Valley and that area around here.
So is that what we have up there was just a kind of general definition of drought. Let's see. Oh, you do have.
I have a mouse,
Oh,
I can
okay.
still do it.
Would you put up the Word document and just make sure we didn't miss something? Just a few more components of drought, and we have several of these in what you just said. Things that, in addition to all of these, if we consider those as we're thinking about how drought impacts your work, your organizations, that it's long-term, short-term, rapid fluctuation, precipitation, how's that one? That maybe there's no water, or then maybe there's a flood after that. High temperatures and extended periods of high temperatures, reduction in water supply, loss of water sources, or too much water that it won't sink into the ground, and then water quality also. I don't know if there's additional things that you would add to those kind of characteristics.
I kind of remember, the recharging the groundwater, because I recall either 2002 or 2007, somewhere in there, we had an up year, they had a huge snowpack, and they thought, man, this is going to fill up all the reservoirs, and we're going to have a great summer and have plenty of irrigation water. And then once the water reached the reservoir, there wasn't near as much as they anticipated. I think it did have to soak in, mainly in Wyoming, and recharge their groundwater supplies. I kind of recall that.
When that South Platte flood hit in 2013, and it took out a bunch of lions and longmonts from cities in Colorado, came into Nebraska, was flooding pastures around Ogallala. I was driving right when that came to Nebraska. I had a meeting in Kearney, and then I went on to Lincoln. And so at Kearney, the river was just hitting flood stage as I left, and the water never reached Grand Island. Grand Island, even 3 days later, the riverbed was dry. It just.
But part of that, they did divert a lot of that through irrigation canals to purposefully recharge groundwater in places that they wouldn't normally as well. That was a big partnership with the Department of Natural Resources.
Yeah,
Right,
there are a lot
chronic
of
violence
things
in
there.
those downstream and what they use.
Were there areas in the central areas to do that too?
Hmm?
Were there areas in the central areas in the central part of the state?
Yeah,
that
it
did
was-
that too?
Yeah,
Oh, that's
the CNPPID
large
canals did
areas.
it, they did it, I think they did it in France.
okay.
And a couple of the other NPPD canals, but those are the last ones along.
Well, I think that's helped us in the last few years too, or 6 years of them diverting water through our canals, and that's kind of saved both Scottsbluff and Erie, both of them.
That was the nice thing in 2012, as dry as it was, at least we had pretty good irrigation water that really helped.
So now up here I have, if we start to think about, brainstorm all of the challenges, problems that drought could bring to you and your work. If we arrange it by if those problems or difficulties happen before drought, during drought, or after drought, they can be all three. They can continue on through the different periods. And so this is sort of going to be just the huge, all of your ideas, if we get them down on paper. And then after that, we can start to organize them a little bit better. And I'm debating, you guys are kind of, so we have media, we have local government, we have planning within local government, we have water within, so I don't know if you want me to just throw them all up here, if you want me to try and color code which area they come from, if that would be helpful.
I guess it makes no difference to me if it's easier for you as you're going back and looking at stuff to
Okay.
separate it out. That's
I think if we just start, and then maybe I can write who says what.
Do you still want this up here?
No, well, I guess for now we can leave it there. Just because
Okay.
I don't need it.
Okay. I'm still the only person who's using.
Yeah, I don't know else that would be joining, so.
Okay.
And this can be from a sector perspective, planning in general, media in general, relating to the public during a drought. It can be, I do this on a day-to-day basis, and when I get to that part of my day, that's going to be a problem because of all of these factors that we've just mentioned. I'm looking for all levels of difficulties, I guess.
I guess from a city standpoint, running out of water for people is really not an option. It's not acceptable for us to not be able to provide water on demand to people. The biggest challenge with that is that, especially from a planning standpoint, is that people have such short memories. And on a dry year, then people are all about, let's try to plant stuff that doesn't take as much water. Well, that's not really the best time to rip up established landscape and start over again. Really ideally they should do that on a wet year and then be prepared for the dry years, but it doesn't work that way. It's the years where you have drought that people want to get buffalo grass established and everything else, and the years that there's plenty of water is when people don't think that it's an issue, and they don't really think about it ever being an issue, and it's hard to get that mindset changed.
Okay, so the city is running out of water. Would that be an issue before drought, during, post? Like, when would that circumstance happen?
I'd say during.
And would it end during, or would it extend into after a drought? Would that even still be a challenge?
It would depend, I think, on how prolonged the drought was, but it could very easily extend afterwards because if people are moving away, or if you're losing population, losing confidence in the city's ability to provide water, you're not going to be able to get people to come to the city.
Even post, if you do have something like that happen, I would guess that the city's going to be willing to, and residents too, would be willing to pay additional costs to find an alternative water supply. How do I want to word this? A water supply that's more reliable during drought conditions, and almost impossible in this area to come up with something unless you can find a deeper aquifer or something like that. But, I think on the pre-side, all water systems have to submit a emergency plan to the state, the Health and Human Services Department, which regulates public water systems. So hopefully everybody's kind of addressed some of those issues, and it is bad if we run out of water, but one good thing is I think we have found, and I think Jack and I talk a lot, but we probably have the same people in our emergency plans of who we would contact to get at least bottled water for people, so at least they have drinking water. It might be a little more difficult if you run out of city water to be able to shower and things like that for personal hygiene, but at least we would have water to drink so people can survive. So there is an emergency plan. Maybe another pre on the city side is make sure you have an ordinance in place that allows you to enforce water restrictions as you enter into a drought. And, I know we have one. I'm not particularly fond of it. I'd like to revise it, and I hope we do soon. But it's dependent on some of my time and some of my staff's time, but that's something that's a good tool to have for when we are in drought situations.
And that was an
ordinance for water restrictions to get customers to reduce the use of their water. That would limit irrigation use for lawn watering, to a period of time, and it could eventually halt all uses of lawn irrigation, anything other than domestic use. I'm sure Jack has one.
I don't know if we have anything in ordinance. I know in 2012 they asked for voluntary watering restrictions. That is something that I would be interested in working with the NRD and UNL Extension to get some ideas, because I know when we did ours, we had like odd numbered houses water on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, even numbered houses numbered the other days. And having talked to Jim Shield about that a little bit, he said that's really not a great
causes people to use more water.
Exactly.
Right.
And so I would like to know,
Makes you use more water.
because people think, oh, I can't water tomorrow, I better make sure I get it done today.
I see.
And so, you know, I would like to work with people to figure out what actually is effective as far as watering restrictions. I think times of day would be a better way to do it, so you're not watering when it's
True.
105 degrees out.
Yeah, and that's something we worked hard on, to get people to put water in between the hours of, I don't remember, 11 a.m. and 6 p.m. Because and
Use it all.
I think guys might have done somebody did some studies that said that 70% of the water you're putting on at that time was evaporating, not even reaching the plant. You know, that's one thing that I guess I'm getting off subject, but we've had a lot of help in 2000, early 2000 through 2000, is the NRD and the UNL. That's just in everybody on, you know, wise water use, I guess, during the drought conditions. So.
And I guess that could be a challenge to put down too, is just the education component.
Yeah.
Making sure.
It must have been around 2012 when we worked on a series of news releases. And I know that the Master Gardener program and a lot of the PSAs that volunteers do for the Master Gardener program have had a heavy focus on water, so what would you call them? Sustainable landscaping or low water use landscaping, everything from rain gardens to choice of types of plants you do in green plant.
Trademark on that one.
They
If I'm
do?
not mistaken. I think that's what I was. Yeah, I think it was City of Aurora.
Okay, so I've divided this.
But I think they let me use it.
You guys started to come up with a lot of the strategies that you're already using to conserve water, to prepare for drought. I tried to write down some of the more impact vulnerability related topics that you discussed, that we can come back over here and put these on. Annie, you started to talk about people having short memories.
Yes.
Yeah, so where does that happen, or where?
I'd
where
say
is
that would
a-
be pre and post, anytime but during.
all the time.
I think I see some of that at the NRD too, among irrigators. If there's not a crisis, or if the state is not requiring us to do something, sometimes putting regulations on groundwater use can be a tough sell.
Okay.
Mhm.
And what was the specific example that you were using in regards to people not remembering what they remember?
For planning purposes, you know, things like that, talking about strategies, you know, people say it's just not a priority for them. So trying to get policies passed, trying to convert, like for cities, trying to convert high water usage park areas or different things, trying to convert those into very drought tolerant areas. If it's not a pressing need, if people don't, they just don't see it as a pressing need, I guess I should say, because they have short memories. We've got enough water now, we'll worry about that later.
I like your zooescape example. You know, carrying it along.
Right.
And it's drought and trying to plant something and get something reestablished. I mean, that's a reactive kind of a knee jerk. But that's normal.
But I know for the city, we had more people calling wanting to know about Buffalo grass in 2012 than we ever have. And, you know, that's not the time to do it.
So if I put lack of understanding of need for policy and regulation, does that
I think
encompass both of them, or is it not a lack of understanding, but a lack of what? what is the one word or phrase that we could put on this sort of?
Lack of will, I guess.
Reluctance. I see both, a lack of understanding and because of that, a reluctance to,
Yeah.
We almost need to be
Conserve.
reminded.
Yeah.
You know, like the educational part of it. It almost needs to be, I don't want to say redundant, but we always try to, you know, in the media thing, you have to repeat things almost 3 times before people catch it once. And so it's the same way there, you know. I mean, you can't say when you're in a drought, hey, guess what? You almost need to get them educated. If you knew, like, how do you know?
And I mean, I understand to a point, because it's the same for residents as it is for communities. We have limited resources. We have, you know, we can't do everything that we would like to do. And so I understand people not wanting to completely redo their yard to put in drought tolerant everything because it's money, it's time, it's effort. Same thing on the city side. But on the other hand, it's at what point do you get people educated enough that they can start incrementally making those changes maybe, so that it's not such a knee-jerk reaction. Oh my gosh, we had a good year of 18 inches last year. Now the last 3 years we've only had 6. We've got to rip everything out at once and redo
So
it.
can I put reluctance to plan as different from reluctance to conserve? Are those two different things that the restricting yourself is difficult in itself, and then also planning to restrict yourself in the future is also difficult, and those are both challenges. Does that make sense? Or I guess not necessarily planning to restrict yourself or conserve, but planning to change habits, or just planning in general to change what you're doing.
You call it planning or public education?
Well, and then I was going to come back and add what you said about
Okay.
taking so long
Yeah,
to
okay.
get it across to people as another challenge. So then what would we call that? Something to do with the amount of time that it takes to do education, to get messages across.
Because it's true, like, we get so many messages, or press releases that are 2 or 3, maybe 5 days ahead of something. And our people out there, you can't just drop what you're doing and pre-plan in 5 days. You almost need to go 2 weeks at least to let people know ahead of time.
So if you're talking like if there were a meeting or
Yeah,
some
I'm talking
event.
about a
that,
meeting, you know, just a plan, anything. I mean, sometimes we get stuff and we're a weekly paper. That's another problem. You know, we can't do it every day. But here's a vital meeting that maybe somebody in our community, you know, few sectors need to go to. And we get the information 3 days ahead of the meeting.
So those seem like actually 2 topics, because I guess at least the way I understood what you said before is sort of the learners needing time to learn,
Yes.
and now you're talking about planners
Yeah, I'm
needing
sorry.
to. No, that's good. I just want to make sure that if that's
There's
an
2.
accurate.
There's the number of times you need it.
Okay.
There's the time before, if you're talking pre,
Uh-huh.
or even post, you know, to remind.
Okay. So then to put both of those up here, maybe learners needing time to learn a certain piece of information, or the public needing time to learn a certain piece of information, and then also planners being late in providing that information.
I'm just trying to be earlier.
Provide information in time for them to act.
Yeah.
Okay. And when is that happening? Before a drought? So with people needing time to absorb things.
Yeah.
And then is that only here? Does it continue throughout drought that it just takes a certain amount of time for?
It could be during, you know, if you're
I
trying to
think
get
it's
stuff
all
across
through.
about conserving water and stuff. It could be
During, and then you, Annie and Pat, you said on to.
I think you could have it post too.
yeah, you can.
Okay, and then, and I get, and maybe I'm confusing you with these, I'm phrasing them as challenges or problems. So, like where you say that planners need to give people more time, and then I'm trying to rephrase it as the problem as it is now, that there's not, that maybe they don't give them enough time.
Right.
So, lack of adequate time, adequate notification.
Yeah.
I would say it's not just time. I would say the challenge would just be figuring out how to most effectively educate people. Whether that's giving them more time or making sure they're hearing it multiple times from multiple sources, or
And I have a question related to that. Is multiple audiences a challenge too? When you're talking
Right.
about things like buffalo grass or choosing plants, there's the public to deal with. Is there also greenhouses?
right.
We need to get the retail side that sells those plants and grass
Right.
on board too, where they are,
We need to
selling those, because there's very, I think you go through, any greenhouses and some of those. I mean, they do have some drought tolerant plants, but they don't have very many. I think that's, I don't know. I see, look at the greenhouses, they're more of I see those more of a flower shop and the buy their plants for their gardens, but they do sell some little bushes and things like that. But I guess even look at the big box stores like Menards and Walmart and those, they sell trees and bushes, but some of those aren't drought tolerant and need quite a bit of water.
I don't know how often they're
Right, in our area. That's the other thing that's a buy big box.
Can that be communication with multiple audiences or diverse audiences? Yeah. Is that pre, during?
I'd say all three.
I'd say all three, yeah.
And then I guess this kind of is on a similar note, but thinking about one of the other hats I wear that's kind of the flip side of drought is a floodplain manager. And in all the different things I go to for training and everything for that, they talk about the importance of accurately stating the impact of a flood event, that being able to communicate to people, because you don't want to cry wolf, basically. You don't want to say that it's going to be worse than it is, because pretty soon people stop ignoring flood warnings. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, you don't want to not state how bad it's going to be and leave people unprepared. And so, like for floodplains, they have very definite definitions and ways to calculate it and everything of what a 10-year flood or a 20-year flood or a 100-year flood, what that looks like, which gives people a good idea of, okay, we're expecting a 100-year flood, you can expect this. And, we're even doing things where you can show that on a map now and different things like that. I know of no equivalent for drought, but I think it would be incredibly valuable to be able to refer back and say, this is only a 10-year drought, it's not that bad, and look how much our community is suffering. And we need to prepare for, and the other thing is on the planning side of it, you don't plan a community for a 1,000-year flood. You don't plan a community for a 5,000-year flood. I mean, it comes to a point where there's a payback on it, and it's a measurable amount of risk and what level of risk is acceptable. And it would be the same thing for drought, is how do we justify the decisions that we are making based on an acceptable level of risk?
Tracy, I don't know, I can't speak to the drought monitor. I don't know if you want to add.
It's not really designed for that. And you know, that's actually a really interesting point. But the funny thing about drought that isn't necessarily true of floods is that there are a lot of different ways of talking about drought. You know, it can be a lack of precipitation thing. It can be an extreme heat thing. It can also be something that you're seeing more on an agricultural level, but that might not show up necessarily as lack of precipitation. So when you're calculating the statistical recurrence rate of a flood, you can talk about things like, statistically speaking, this kind of flood happens once in 500 years or once in 10 years. It's harder to do that with droughts, partly because there are those different ways of talking about it too. Also, drought is a little bit harder to decide when it starts and decide when it stops, sort of depending on which factor it is you're looking at. So if you were trying to calculate a recurrence rate, which start and stop do you use? You know, so maybe a way of thinking about it instead is when you're trying to think about acceptable levels of risk, maybe there's a sort of spectrum that could be developed that describes some of those conditions that you're trying to manage for based on, is it temperature, certain temperature levels, or a certain number of days in a row that your temperature is a certain amount, and is that coupled with X amount of rain, and is that also coupled with certain, other factors, or do you just have this one factor by yourself so that the risks that you're managing for aren't necessarily the same as if you had all these other things going.
So then what you're talking about, would you say it's a lack of consistent definitions for both assessment and then communication with the public?
Yeah, I think it's even more than just that. I think it's a lack of definition of what constitutes a severe drought. I mean, that's not just for communication with the public, that's for planning purposes as well.
And I guess that's what I meant by assessment.
Okay.
If you want to say planning and communication. So, if you would, lack of consistent definitions.
Yeah.
Or for planning purposes.
I guess you could also say maybe that we have no definite amount of risk, or no definite way of determining what level of risk is acceptable. Because I mean, you could plan for a drought that lasts for 100 years where we never get a drop of rain, but realistically, that's probably not going to happen. But at what point between that, between a normal year and it never raining again, at what point do we think it's likely enough to happen that we need to have plans in place to prepare for it? At what point do you get the correct rate of return on your investments?
Lack of scale for determining acceptable risk.
Yeah.
Okay. And I wrote those because I was just trying to get them down. But are they supposed to be in three, or do they need to go?
I would say that goes through all three, because I think even during a drought, like you say, some of it's the nature of the drought where they're year-long things instead of days-long, like floods, to where you don't know for sure how long it's going to last. But even post, I really have never seen droughts very well put into perspective other than anecdotal data saying this is worse than the drought in the 30s. But there's no, this is likely to happen again type thing.
Okay.
Annie, you and Pat talked about something that I don't know if it belongs here. And you mentioned ordinances and basically the only approach seems to be some type of rotation system or something like that. Do municipalities need more resources from somebody in terms of model ordinances or ideas? And in the ensuing discussion, there was another aspect of that came to mind that where maybe resources would be helpful. And since then, evaporated from my mind. But either ordinances and potentially other areas, do you need?
I think that would be really helpful. I don't negative about anything the city has done, but I do think that you can't. Well, it's okay.
I'm serious.
I think our community is not unique in that it tends to be a knee-jerk reaction that we're getting into a drought, we need to adopt something right away. And so that's like in 2012, they did the every other day thing as a voluntary thing. And, ideally we would have model ordinances and different things already in place and have the research from Extension or NRD or whoever that shows that they actually work, rather than what do we do? Let's just throw something out there and hope it helps.
And that's, I agree. That's why I'd like to change ours a little bit. I think our foundation's good. We looked at several other cities, and Lincoln was one that was we looked at quite a bit and took parts and pieces from that and adapted to our system. And I think but we used other cities. I think Norfolk had something good that we used pieces of, and Kearney and other cities, and even the Front Range, Denver, and some of those cities along the Front Range, we took bits and pieces out of theirs because their climate's a little more similar to ours. But we need to adjust ours a little bit, just with some of the changes we've done to our system, but and some of it we just not sure that our schedule when we have to keep the water and don't water, if we're not getting to it. We've got to watch that. It's something we want to do this year yet. I hope we get done, so it's half time.
Can I put that down as need for new or adjusted ordinances?
Yeah. If anything, review the ordinance and make sure
Right.
that they're make sure that your ordinance is going to work. It's going to reduce use.
And it's going to have the effect that it's intended to.
It's intended to have, right? Not be the opposite.
Right. Or have model ordinances available for communities too, so that rather than
Sure.
having to call around the 12 different communities and compile
Sure,
your own,
compile
you can
and-
have something that's
yeah.
already.
I don't know if California's done anything.
That would be a good place
that
to
would be
look. Yeah.
applicable here.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of communities that have.
Okay. Does that stay in pre, or is that something that you would continue to do?
I would say
All of them? You would
Mhm.
review through all of them?
I think post would be a good time to look at it and see how it did work
Yeah,
out.
how did it work?
You'll have your pumping data by
Right.
then.
So then if I add down here, assess
Mhm.
effectiveness.
Maybe one of those other areas I was thinking of was rate structures.
Yep, that's another thing I think we should look at.
And it is getting, technology's catching up, I should say, and where you can, read meters more often than just once a month. You can read them in some cases, you can read them multiple times a day, up to 4 times a day. So you could have rates for higher use during these hours. And for us, that's difficult right now, but I know other cities that have different systems can do that. Eventually, if we put an antenna up and can read from one central point, we would be able to do the same thing. So that's something that, I know some cities have looked at as having different rates for different, and I believe they do that in California and Nevada and some of those states that are a little more here.
Do you want me to put that down as a potential strategy? Do you want me to put need for rate structure or need to consider rate structure? Should we put it in both places, phrased differently?
Do it either way. You can even have if you can't read every day, you could have a higher rate for drought conditions when you're in that restrictions, and you could charge additional fees for water. That really is forced conservation.
Yeah, well, and that would help the water departments too, because they're selling less waters, but they still have the same overhead costs. So,
yeah,
that addresses that revenue.
Yeah, I would say it definitely under strategies. I think under challenges, you could put that at least for our communities in our area, there's a lack of having seen it implemented and a lack of understanding of how that would work.
And is it just rate structures? Is it variable? What's the term that you?
I would say a lack of research on alternative rate structures.
Rate structure, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I like the idea of having a higher rate during the drought, because more than watering and restrictions and trying to enforce it and everything, you're not going to have to. If they're seeing it on their water bill, they're going to voluntarily start conserving.
Yeah. That's something probably should go on the first sheet is municipalities can see in a drought, and you do go to water restrictions, a severe loss in revenues.
For cities?
Yes, for cities
So
or municipalities, right.
Loss of revenue for water departments.
Yeah, because we're required by state statute to have our budget year runs October 1 through September 30th. Well, most cities we're starting our budget process now, and our budget is pretty much complete by mid-July, other than just a few minor changes. But the problem is 60% of the revenues, and I'm sure Jack's is the same, similar, of my revenues come in June, July, and August. Well, I have 1 month I know of good revenues for this year, but I'm using last year's July and August, or I look at a similar year of precipitation of what we kind of think we're having the rest of this year. I mean, it's a numbers game, but we bid projects out in the winter. We have all these, we have our fixed costs that we have every year, and if we don't get those revenues, then we're struggling to, most likely, hopefully, we have reserve and we're taking money out of reserve.
So then would an additional challenge be the sort of time frame variability of income, of revenue, like when you're getting it?
Yeah.
That it makes a difference if you have it at this point or you don't have it at that
point. Right. Really that could be for all, and having a reserve pre-drought would be good to have. I mean, you need a reserve to survive the years where you don't have the revenues come in, and that happens all the time. We could have a wet year and lose revenue.
Right. And actually, as long as you don't actually have to go to watering restrictions, dry years are going to be your better revenue years.
Yeah, that's true.
That's during drought.
So if I call that other one income variability, revenue variability, something to imply that what you're getting in.
You could call it revenue variability, because it will vary one way or the other, whether wet or dry.
But do you see that as different from loss of revenue, or are you seeing those as the same thing and you only need this on the board?
question. I think probably just that on the board. I don't know what, yeah, I think that's
Just
good
that
on the
is
board
okay.
there. Yeah, because you're gonna lose revenues if
Because
you
the
do
years where you have
restrictions.
good revenue, that's not much challenge.
Okay, all right.
One thing on the first sheet we did too, we might want to add, I
Okay.
just thought of is water quality.
Okay.
Water
Oh,
quality,
and in the drought
yeah,
one, okay.
water quality does change and we have experienced that in our water. We may not as with our new wells, but our old wells, we definitely saw that.
And I've been thinking about pests and disease too.
What kind of pest and disease are you thinking of in particular?
Well, everything from pine beetles to whatever turns my beetles brown on my pine trees to things that are, every time I ask Jim Schild or Amy Seiler about a particular thing that's going around in the trees, it seems very often the answer is, well, this is related to the stress that they've been under for the last
Right.
few
Yeah.
years. And
So it would be the stress on trees that makes them vulnerable to pests.
there you go.
Is that pre or during?
That would be during and post.
So stress on only trees to be bad.
I think you see it the most in trees because they're the most valued. You probably see it in other landscape plants as well, but it's not as hard to replace a perennial as it is a 30-year oak tree or something that's been there a long time.
So stress on trees that leads to disease.
That makes
Disease
them
and
vulnerable
So
to
that makes me.
disease and pests.
And I've been thinking about private homeowners, but parks and everything else. You guys have a lot of trees.
Yeah, I think Ron, our park director, said, they've lost quite a few of the blue spruces and some of the other various pine trees.
And that would be post too, because
Yeah.
sometimes you don't see the effect of it until years afterwards.
Relates a lot of that to the dry conditions.
Are there other specific ways that the pest and disease issue could show up within local governance or communicating that to the media? Challenges with describing that to them, or
Usually we hear about, you hear about people losing 10 established trees or something. And usually it's because of the drought.
And I think the challenge to that is that it's not an immediate effect. That,
Right.
like you say, it's years afterwards that then you look at it and they tie it back. So people look at their tree during the drought and they think, oh, it's doing fine, it's handling it great. Well, not really. It's just that it's going to take a few years for it to really show that effect.
Maybe it has some plants and stuff would be like crops,
right.
during the drought. I mean, that's just.
You can see it right there. So delayed effects of diseases that are enabled by drought make it long.
Did you say you were involved in county government as well? Or
No.
just that you're in?
No, I just.
I think you could just say the delayed effects of drought.
And okay, I was going to ask, do we need to specify the different delayed effects, or for now you just want to put
I would just say
a lot
I
of them?
just say, yeah.
Okay. And then on into post.
Yeah.
You want to do
I
some
was
tree,
trying-
you can do some things to conserve soil moisture by, of course, landscaping around the trees, mulching around the trees, that'll help keep what moisture falls. Yeah, and it could be both pre and post.
So that to me is more of a strategy, like mulching around trees to help them keep their moisture. Like here, I can put it as the strategy, or I can change it and we can say lack of mulch or lack of, again, preparation to help trees keep moisture. And that kind of goes into, over there we put reluctance to plan. I can add from maybe a more city or government perspective, need for additional preparations or something like that. From put mulching for trees.
Yeah.
But
And I think even more than just mulching around trees, I would just say landscaping practices in general. Which I guess maybe we already have that with the water use plants.
what do you call them? Efficient?
Landscaping best practices.
There you go. All that was coming to mind was what Jim Show came up with, make every drop count.
Yes. We need Jim here.
It's funny.
Work with them as much as I used to.
Has seen everything and thought about everything. It seems like
I'm sorry, my city administrator's phone rarely calls on their
When you were talking earlier about people, the voluntary water restrictions and how that actually encouraged more use because of the sort of time schedule they were on, what would you call that? Like what's the word for that type of challenge that motivates people to actually use more water? Is it just, again, back to the lack of education? Is
That's
it
the lack of education and the lack of research, I guess, as to the actual effect of a policy.
okay?
And you know, that's probably a little bit challenging to even research, because how do you compare what people would normally use during a drought to what people are using during a drought under this policy? Again, it's going to vary so much depending on the temperature and the everything.
So would it fit under here?
I think
Like,
it
is
still
covered
fits under that.
Okay.
Yeah. People do what they intend to do.
Okay.
The only thing I might add is ordinances / policies. It may not be an ordinance, it may be more of a
Policy. Let's see. I'm just gonna put it again so I don't forget.
I've heard several times mentioned today there's a need for research. Maybe somebody in Lincoln needs to, or somewhere needs
We've got
to.
some scratch books too, if you need a bigger sheet of paper.
Maybe that would, because I'm not knowledgeable with some of these.
You know, it's a lot easier to get something passed if you have solid research behind it showing that it actually is going to work.
Yeah.
It'd be nice, yeah, it'd be nice to see. I know Lincoln had restrictions, was it last year or a couple of years ago?
I think that was a few years ago.
Yeah. And I haven't talked to any of the people I know in Lincoln. I should talk to them and find out how it worked and what they did to revise it.
And you had also mentioned, I'm not, maybe it was you, Pat, losing population. Like if things get bad enough, you have people moving away. Should I during drought, or is that just a post-drought thing?
I think Annie mentioned that during a if the city ran out of water, and I think,
Right.
I think that would most likely be a post, but it could be during.
Depending on the longevity of the.
Right.
Okay.
All of Pete's. Well, he's got another pad there, but we also have ours are right there, so we can just replenish his with ours. It seems a little unfair to just use all of it, yeah.
I'm not sure how they did it up there on the.
Oh. We can fiddle with it as a break. Which I haven't been very good at watching time and develop. It's kind of
How long have you been
No longer than 3 hours, take a break at 2:30, but if you need a break now.
Well, I just am going to have to leave about 3:15.
Oh, okay, oh, yeah. You guys had also mentioned overwatering, and I'm not sure that is covered.
And the way you can say that is the challenge is people's behaviors and attitudes during a drought.
Only during or also pre?
Well, I'd say it's pre too, because
Yeah.
they're habits that are developed before a drought that then become a problem during a drought.
Do I need to clarify water related, landscape management related?
I think it would be fun.
Yeah. I think you could do that all the way through, because some people think, well, if I add, once the drought's over, restrictions over, I'm gonna double water,
Right.
and thinking that that's gonna benefit the plant, and they're probably not going to, because I think after, they're still stressed and might not be the best thing for it. They might be more susceptible to disease and things like that.
What are your thoughts on water quality? What are the specific challenges that would be faced in regards to water quality as a result of the drought?
One thing is your surface water qualities are going to change. This is maybe not a great thing for some people to know, but or say that with lower flows in the rivers or streams, any discharges of that stream, whatever contaminants are in it, are going to be less diluted, so you see an increase in contaminants. Ammonia, fertilizers, things like that are not going to be diluted like they are this time of year in the river. So, and even wastewater plant discharges are based on average river flows, and if they're down to historic lows, then even those discharges are not going to, and that's going to affect surface water and groundwater quality, because I think both ways.
So
Yeah.
Start during.
So during it would be a higher concentration of pollutants.
Right. Stormwater discharges, they're not going to dilute in historic low level.
in surface water and wastewater.
Yeah, I think surface water, wastewater discharges, any runoff into a stream. Could be out even off a farm field, really. True.
Yeah, and I think the potential for leaching, you mentioned groundwater, the potential for leaching nitrate, especially during drought, is probably an area where more research is needed, because one of the basic assumptions in the nitrate issues that we've had over the years has been that if we didn't have our surface water and a lot of irrigation water going on to flush it through, that the nitrate problem might be worse than it is. So if you, assuming that everything else stays the same amount of nitrate or nitrogen applied, which I don't know is a valid assumption. I think the more I think about it, it's a complicated situation.
Well, that's okay, but still the idea, the need for research on nitrate leaching.
Yeah.
Do you want me to put that post, through all of them?
I think pre, I was going to say definitely pre and probably during, but post too.
No, I think it could go off. Yeah.
Because it's complicated. It's affected by the amount of inputs in the first place, whether it's on your lawn or corn crop or whatever. It's affected by the putting a lot of irrigation water on one hand might, on a large scale, help flush the system through, but it might also leach it more quickly. So the more I think about it, the more confused I think I get.
That's why we need more research. Okay. Other water quality issues. How about you, Kelly? Do you have prior experiences with communicating to the public about water quality issues and their reactions, how that's
Well,
worked?
I don't want to say government doesn't, I mean, we have to put out the water quality tests and stuff like that.
You publish the results, or how does that?
Well, the city has to do that once a year.
Oh, okay.
Or twice a year. And we're in our small town, actually, they've had to find another well because we have arsenic, the levels of arsenic has increased and stuff. So they have found another water supply, which increases the price of water, which increases, and I do believe it's probably partially because of the wells getting lower, and stuff like that. And our valley is known for having high nitrate levels in the water already. So I think it brought with the levels of like that.
And we saw
It
that.
increases it maybe.
Okay.
As for the public, the city does what they have to do by law and stuff. I don't know. Water issues are always a concern.
And I guess from the public that you deal with, they understand that the city is just doing what they need to do, or is there feedback that maybe they don't understand that that's
Recently, everyone
necessary?
received a letter about the arsenic level, and they've been working on the well situation for quite a few years down there. Most of the people just have to accept it. Some buy bottled water, some used to have a water supply that's sold water.
Okay.
From the sand hills, we recently are retiring, so that source is going away.
As a member of the media in rural Nebraska, do you feel like you have the resources to call on if you want to cover that issue and provide answers?
I feel any entities I've ever asked have helped. We do a lot of calling if we don't understand something or if we want to make it. Sometimes the releases we get are over, they always tell us fifth grade level. People need to have fifth grade level. wording to understand it, for the general public. Once in a while, on issues that are complicated, it is not fifth grade level. But when we call or want to confirm stuff, which we believe what they're telling us, sometimes we reword stuff. And we do stuff like that, but I've always had good luck with people helping. So.
And the city sends out their arsenic notice, of course, the state has a. There
It's a
is
big
federal
old
government
form with lots of
mandates
foreign
certain
words,
language,
yes.
right, and that's what's sad, and in our water quality reports, we do the annually same thing, they're all the same except for the
Right.
center
It's
spreadsheet.
just too bad they couldn't just say it in a small paragraph, shorten it up and just let us know what's going on.
Yeah.
You know.
Requiring.
Watch out.
Right, or a graph or something, you know, here's normal, here's where you are, or something like that.
You know, we did quite an extensive study in the nineties and early 2000s on uranium and arsenic, and this happened to be Steve Segray was giving a talk, and I was giving a talk at the same place, and we both had our graphs up, and when we got done, we started talking, and we put the graphs together, and with our uranium and arsenic increases in our water quality, worked with his graph showing when the irrigation canals were on or off, and so there were no return flows back in to dilute everything, and it just fit perfect. I mean, and so that goes with what you're saying too. If you're in a declining water table, that might be why the arsenic's going up. I don't know. So that's where the droughts could have a good effect with water quality.
So then do we also need to, because I don't have on here, you talked about it here. I don't have water quantity, like the reduction in water leading to worse water quality. So if I put on water quality to cover what Kelly was talking about, what we're all talking about different chemical substances in the water. But do I do the same thing with water quantity? Do you need me to put a little bit more detail with each of those?
I would say just add to water quality, decreasing due to drought.
Drought as in less water quantity.
Right.
Okay.
That'll both happen, I think, in the aquifer and the rivers and streams. It's going to be both.
Just another thing, I'm on the school board down there too, and to me, one of the most valuable resources we have as communities is our youth. We need more education as to water, drought, all the stuff we're talking about, could be put into mini courses or into some sort of curriculum.
Okay.
I think the earlier we start, the more important it is, even in the elementary grades. I know Dave Wolf comes down and he does stuff with our elementary kids and stuff. And, I just think more the better to educate starting younger.
So need for additional water / drought related education
I think so. For the youth, yeah.
Okay. Pre, during, post, all of them.
I would say all of them.
Do kids go to the water festival?
They do, I believe.
Sydney.
Yeah.
They'll see the acceptance.
Do I need to add anything different in regards to adults. We've talked about behaviors, habits is associated with like specific actions in watering or landscape management. But do I need to add somewhere in here just topical knowledge on drought and water for the adult population? Or is that encompassed in probably all of
I
this
think that's
people's
kind of
water
encompassed
landscape?
in communicating with diverse audiences.
Okay. There, I guess I was probably referring to the methods of communication. So from maybe Kelly, if you're, again, like what level do you word it or how do you describe it? But if you want me to, I can add that maybe that means content and method, so that it's a little more in depth. What else are we missing? There's aspects that we've forgotten. I guess most of these look like fairly broad level topics that have to do with your kind of areas as a whole. I don't know if there are more specific job or role related challenges that you would want to add that might be applicable to other people in your sector. So in local government, whatever you do, that other people are going to do. If there's additions like that, or if you'd rather keep it at this level. Maybe we can take a break and think about that. If we take about 15 minutes. I think you guys all saw the coffee and snacks there, and then the restrooms are across the hall. Do you want to put up the vulnerability?
You're just doing the same thing over and over again with all the groups, is it kind of redundant?
I mean, there's some that overlap, but there's a lot of good ideas and differences, and that's why we wanted to range people by sectors, is to be able to go kind of in depth into those areas, and so it's really helpful.
This one, where are the definitions?
Whichever one you thought was better.
I think at least yesterday it seemed like the definition.
Okay.
It's hard to see the boundary.
Oh, the secretary.